Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Ben-Lian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. Today's conversation explores one of the most important developments in modern psychology, the effort to move beyond fragmented schools of therapy toward a unified understanding of how psychological change actually occurs. For more than a century, psychotherapy has been divided into competing orientations: psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral, humanistic, interpersonal, each offering partial insight into the complexity of the human mind. Yet, beneath these differences lies a deeper question. Are there common processes that underline all effective psychological transformation? My guest today, Dr. Jeffery Smith, has devoted his career to precisely this question. Dr. Smith is a clinical professor of psychiatry at New York Medical College, former president of the Society for the Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration, an organization dedicated to identifying the shared principles that make therapy effective across theoretical traditions. His work, including the affect avoidance model, examines how emotional learning, avoidance, and integration shape the development and resolution of psychological suffering. His perspective brings together clinical insight, neuroscience, and decades of psychotherapeutic practice in an effort to clarify the mechanisms through which meaningful change becomes possible. And he is the author of many articles, and he has his own Substack and blogs, and he has many efforts on many fronts, but he's also anticipating the upcoming publishing of his book, How Psychotherapy Works. And so I am delighted and honored to have you as my guest today at the One in the Many. Dr. Smith, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Arshak. That was a very nice introduction, and it really kind of sums up a lot. And so I'm really happy to be here and to talk with you.
Yes, indeed, me too. So, as every essay, every story has beginning, middle, and end. And I see every one of our lives as a story that we write as we are alive. So, living that story, where did your story begin?
Well, it begins when I was not old enough to ride a tricycle. One of my earliest memories is I was watching the neighbor kid ride her tricycle really, really fast. And I was very impressed, but I asked myself a question. I asked myself, are those pedals going up and down, or are they going around? Because it looked like up and down, but it didn't make sense. From that age, I was always interested in how things work. And that has continued ever since. And so since early in my career, I guess one of the most formative experiences was working with early in my post-residency years, working with a woman who turned out to have dissociative identity disorder. And so she had dissociated parts, and and a tremendous amount of huge trauma. And so as we worked on the trauma, one day she finally was able to tell me about the first of a number of terrible things that happened to her. And we extended the session. It was a couple of hours, but at the end of that, we were both exhausted. But the horror she had about this trauma was gone. It was a dull ache, but nothing more than that. And that was permanent. And, I said, my gosh. And nobody taught about trauma in my residency. So I went back and I read Freud. And the early Freud, he had this concept of catharsis. And he said that making the unconscious conscious, which in those days meant helping people get past their dissociative memory barriers and recall things that had happened. And he said, when you do that with feeling, then the trouble goes away and the symptoms disappear. And that was what I was finding. But I also had a very strong hunch that it took something else, that there was something about the presence of another person there. Now, Freud was a good Victorian scientist, and so he assumed that the therapist was an objective observer and didn't participate in what was going on. But I thought otherwise. And then, as with many, many sufferers, many, many survivors of trauma, this person had really, really chronic low self-esteem and some suicidal thoughts and things like that. And what I found was that resolving the low self-esteem was a whole different process, and it took much longer and was harder to do, actually, than the traumatic memories themselves. And so I said, wait a minute. That means that in psychotherapy, in this therapy anyway, there are more than one change process going on. And nobody told me that there were more than one change process. And so I said, well, are there three? Are there more? And I became very interested in how change actually happens. And so there's more to the story, but that really got me started. And that was probably about 1980. So I've been at it for a long time. And, I have a private practice where I'm very happy to see whoever comes in the door, and that's given me a really broad view. If I was an academician, I would have had to specialize in something, but I haven't. And so I have a pretty broad experience, and that's given me kind of an overview at the same time. So I'm always asking questions. I'm always wondering what exactly is going on here, and how is this going to work, and what should I do next? So that's the beginning of the story.
Well, that's a wonderful beginning, isn't it? It's fascinating that that drive, the curiosity drive that we have as children.
Yeah.
To some of us, it never departs from us. It always remains in us, and we're constantly asking, what is this? How does it work? Where is it going to go with all that operation? And that really helps. But unfortunately, some people get astray from that drive, that path of asking questions. And I've seen it again and again. People that forgot to ask questions often get lost.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting dynamic, which leads me to this this understanding of cognition versus emotion. That what do you think drives primarily? Is it the emotional drive that we have, or is it the structure of cognition that learning provides and that consciousness controls in a way? Do we are we product of the combination of the two, and is there a proportion that there's a formula that we can follow, like how much should we give way to our conscious understanding of the world, and how much should we rely on our emotional reactions to the world?
Well, that's a great question, and I think the place where I learned the most about it was also many years ago, my career led me to a role in a program that provided addiction services. By the way, I think you're in Katona, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm about 10 miles away in White Plains.
Yeah, well, one of these days we should sit face to face instead of on the
Yes,
computer.
we certainly should. Uh, so somewhere in probably the 80s or 90s, I got involved with working with people with alcoholism primarily, and when I would be sitting with a person who was in early recovery, they had just come out of rehab, let's say, or had just recently become completely abstinent from drinking, and they were hell-bent to keep their abstinence. They really didn't want to lose it, did not want to relapse, and so they were just determined to keep on with the sobriety that they had gained. And as that was going on, I would sit and listen, and people would come and say, well, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. Or they'd have the idea of, maybe I ought to go visit my old friend Joe, who used to be a drinking buddy, but he respects my recovery, and that'll be okay. And then the person goes to visit with Joe, and Ralph comes along, and Ralph doesn't respect anything, and he says, let's have a drink, and there it is. So what I realized was that there was another part, a non-conscious part of the mind, that had a really exquisite sense of what to say, what kinds of feelings to project into consciousness, what kind of impulses, like the person who would say, I was walking by a liquor store and my feet just turned right. And, my hand reached out to open the door. It just happened. So I became acutely aware that there were two parts of the mind that were not integrated, and that had quite opposite ideas. And so the more I thought about it, the more I had studied it, I realized that what was going on, and there's a lot of research about threat processing in the mind, which goes on in the earlier subcortical brain, the same brain that is very similar to those of your dog, and operates in similar ways that are designed by evolution for species survival. And so what happens is that part of the brain begins to think that drinking alcohol is good for the person. And so what I saw was how much power and subtlety it had in influencing the person to relapse when they did not want to. And that was already somewhat familiar to me from working with dissociative identity disorder, because I was used to sitting with, two or more parts of the same person interacting all at the same time. So it wasn't so strange to me. And so the way I understand it now is that survival-oriented, non-conscious, non-verbal part of the mind that's operating on principles that have to do with survival more than anything else usually works in partnership with consciousness. But at certain circumstances, there's a disintegration, and that part of the mind now has a different agenda and a different plan, and is working with a whole different idea. And it's really quite amazing. One of the things I've seen is that people who have a midlife crisis, not infrequently that midlife crisis comes because the inner mind has had a plan all along and is realizing that the time is getting short and that I'm going to have to make my move pretty soon, or I'm not going to make it.
Right.
And so things like that, entirely outside of consciousness, really have important influence on us. And I'd say that between the two, between conscious willpower and the non-conscious motivation, that the non-conscious has the edge. It's somewhat more powerful when it really wants something different. And so I frequently in my practice, I work with people who have rationalizations that they talk themselves into maladaptive behavior patterns and things like that. And that's a regular thing for me, so that my focus in working in psychotherapy is to help people change the nodes of logic, the schemas deep down in their brain that determine these maladaptive patterns. So how can we use consciousness to reach down into the non-conscious mind and deliver messages that are not familiar, that can stir things up and bring about change? So that's kind of been the focus. But I think there was that book a few years ago on thinking fast and thinking slow.
Right.
And that's been put under question because it's really hard to tell where the dividing line is between the two. Well, what I say is that normally those two don't really have much of a dividing line. They work together. But under circumstances where the inner survival-oriented mind has come up against a serious problem, then the solution becomes frozen in time. And the inner mind actually protects those solutions as if they were vital for survival. And so we get a lot of resistance that when we try to bring about change. And that's why, self-help books don't really do very much good. And you really need some concerted effort and somebody who knows what they're doing, I hope, to help people change those really entrenched maladaptive patterns. So that in a nutshell is how I see the disintegration of the mind when it's really not that easy to get things to start working together, and that's why I think some of the maladaptive patterns and ideas and values and things like that that usually come out of life and death experiences or things that are really close to that, that those become so entrenched and so difficult to let go.
So this is very interesting, and I just want to further a little more that train of thought that you just developed now in terms of the survival instinct, that it's often disconnected or disintegrated. I love that term, disintegration. I use integration, disintegration, and misintegration, which was introduced by Dr. Peikoff. But in this line of thinking, when you were speaking of the disintegration between the conscious realization of what is valuable and yet the unconscious or non-conscious influence of what actually behavior manifests, not as a result of what would be rational, but what is conceived or experienced by the individual as being the survival motivation to act in a way that they acted. So is it the case that it is the individual's understanding of what is survival required, or is it the objective formulation of what survival demands?
Well, it certainly is subjective, but subjective in a complicated way. I'll say a little more about this. This is really kind of interesting.
Yeah.
If you think about your dog, and you get too close to the dog while he's eating out of his bowl, he's going to growl, and we say, oh, the dog is irritated or he's a little bit on edge about this. We assume that those are emotions, but we really don't know, because we don't know what a dog is experiencing. But we have a very similar brain ourselves, which is still the main part of our brain that's tasked with survival. And so the dog's brain works pretty well, because when it runs into, let's say, a life and death situation with a predator, with another dog, it has a very simple choice: flight, fight, or freeze. And so that works really, really well. And what happens is the way the brain works is there's an emotional signal. Excuse me. There's an alarm signal once the brain has detected or predicted that there's a threat. Then an alarm signal goes out, and that alarm signal has an emotional content to it. It's a feeling. And so I call it a proto-feeling, because we can't really tell what exactly it's like, but there it is. And it does have an emotional content. And so that that proto-emotion tells the dog what to do, and in a feedback loop, the action that the dog takes or that the animal takes is designed not to get rid of the predator, but to get rid of the signal that's saying this is a bad situation. And so the response is designed to calm down that alarm signal in the brain. Well, human beings ran into a whole different situation because our survival depends not so much on fighting off predators, it depends on social cohesion, on teaming up with other people and knowing who are your enemies and who are your friends and all of that stuff, which turns out to be much, much, much more complicated. And so it really sort of, I call this a design flaw of evolution, that the brain, that survival-oriented brain is not powerful enough to deal with the complexities of social life of humans. And so it often gets the wrong answer. Like, for example, let's say the most common phobia is public speaking.
Right.
And let's say you have a career where you need to give a talk for your colleagues, and you're terrified to do that. Well, that's evolution saying you better not get up on a rock and proclaim something because you might be thrown out of the tribe and you're going to die.
Right.
But in our society, it's a whole different thing. So that's just a simple example. So what happens is the same shortcut gets used in our brain. The alarm signal is used as a proxy for the danger. And so our brain wants to calm down that danger signal to quiet the emotion that's causing trouble. Well, we're more clever than animals, and so we've figured out all kinds of ways to not have to feel uncomfortable feelings. And this all goes on a non-conscious level, but it may also run in parallel consciously, because we certainly have conscious avoidance of uncomfortable feelings, but there's also, even more important, a powerful non-conscious avoidance of uncomfortable feelings like fear or fear of being alone and things like that. And so let's say, for a simple example, is somebody who's experienced physical trauma, and they're very afraid, but they're afraid of what? Of remembering the trauma. So they use, drugs or something like that so they won't have to remember the trauma. Does that make them any safer in the world? No, it makes them less safe.
Right.
So we're dealing with this situation where, under quite a number of different situations, the mind comes up with a different solution. One of the more common ones is that the inner mind, this is the vocabulary I use with my patients, with my clients, that the inner mind, when there's deprivation, let's say there's not enough support or love in a family to be able to grow the way I need to grow. And kids are very aware of what their needs are. So what do they do to solve that? Well, they're going to wait. They're going to put their growth on hold and wait until some nice person comes along who's finally going to give me the extravagant love that parents are supposed to give their kids. And so then along comes the therapist, and guess who is it? It's the therapist becomes the person who's going to do that. Right. And then we have a complicated sort of dance where the inner mind is influencing the person to try to, to get something from the therapist that's going to say that this therapist is willing to do the work of helping me to grow up the way I need to. And as a therapist, there's some things I can do and some things I can't do. And so there's going to be a disappointment, and we have to work through that disappointment and ultimately to come to some realization. And, people's usual response when they realize that they do have an inner self that's operating independently of them and not always doing the things they want, they want to kick that kid out of the house. They want to punish that nasty little kid who's causing trouble. And I have to tell them, no, that doesn't work. That punishing children never worked, and it still doesn't work even when it's a child inside yourself. What does work is to understand and to empathize. But it also means sometimes taking your own little kid by the hand and saying, no, we're going to do it my way this time.
Right.
So, so that's a snippet of some of the things that go on in my psychotherapy office.
I love that what the chain that we're building in this very short time of a conversation we're having is that what emerges out of this, the value of connection, that connecting is the primary drive of our existence. Now, whether we're going to connect with our mothers, with our spouses, with our children, with our coworkers, with our environment, with our ambitions, whatever it is that we're going to be connecting, whether it's going to be alcohol or tobacco, or rock and roll and sex or whatever it is, we're going to connect with it because that's our drive. We need to connect. And that's how our nervous system is built. It's built on connections. So we have to be mindful of what is it that we want to connect with, or who is it that we want to connect with. And it's very interesting the way you lay it out that, you may be aware of what you want to connect, but often you may not be aware of what you want to connect, and you just connect without being aware of it. And you certainly need psychotherapy to achieve that explicit understanding of what is it that drives you? What is it that you want to connect with? And I guess I'm not as familiar, unfortunately, with the great work that you have done, so I don't know it in detail. But from what I know about you, it's commendable that you have focused your effort in connecting not only the individual in distress or in discomfort psychologically in a psychotherapy session, but you have understood the broader problem in psychology, that it's each one of us that has an idea of helping another. Yes, we are helping to an extent with that other, but there are always gaps. No psychotherapy is perfect in its execution of providing that, heaven that everybody is trying to connect with. So your effort is honorable, commendable, noble, and I haven't read your book yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it. You're writing about this, right? You want to bring those psychotherapists together. So the question for me arises that what drives the effort of connection? Is it the clinical expertise that each psychotherapeutic school brings to the table, or is it a fundamental philosophical study of the mind and how men and women and children operate in this world, in coexisting with each other, that drives the clarification as to what kind of integrative principle will guide the unification of all these schools?
Oh, good question, boy. I do think it's some of both. So all of those schools, they each have their own theories because nobody knew how the brain works or how the mind works, and I run into quite a bit of resistance. That's why I'm talking mainly to young people who are more open-minded. Many of the leaders in my field have chosen their modality, and they're kind of stuck with that. But each of the existing therapies with its own theories and everything has observed good things and come up with really, really good solutions. When you try to mush them together, they don't fit, and so you get a mess. So what I've done is try to understand the infrastructure that lies underneath all of those old theories, and I'm working on filling in an area that's pretty much that's underrepresented in the existing theories of psychotherapy. So there's a lot of good stuff out there, but the piece that I would add to that is I consider myself a student of inner minds and how they think, and that has a lot to do with children. For example, one person I've worked with, the drive for that survival instinct for this person has been that her mother was psychotic, but she really wanted to be able to live the life, to grow up and have the kind of career in life that her intelligence and her education told her she deserved. Now, right away, I'm saying that's at least 8-year-old thinking. That's not a 4-year-old. That's a bigger kid. Whereas the one who's looking for the love that they didn't get, maybe that's a 3 or 4-year-old. And so I'm always really interested in understanding. And lately, for example, one of the things that Freud pointed out, and he was a very, very clever guy, that the non-conscious mind does not have the concept of absence, of zero. And so when you tell somebody, try to push those thoughts out of your mind. Don't have those thoughts. Those are wrong. That's not going to help you. You're asking the person to implement a knot, and they can't do that. So what works much better is to say, let's think of a role model or an example, somebody who to you represents acting in the way that you'd like to adopt for yourself. That's much more powerful and works much better. So I think in answer to your question, I've learned a lot from various modalities of psychotherapy. They all have something to offer. And at the same time, I think that understanding this infrastructure is not that hard to teach and is really, really important in pointing us in the direction of understanding the non-conscious part of the mind, the non-conscious survival-oriented part of the mind, and being able to work with that through some translation that goes on using words or experience or other things, nonverbal things like tone of voice and relationship and so on that reach down. So I learn from any source I can.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I mean, to that extent, my orientation is more philosophical in the sense that I believe that because in the way I see it, we are driven by this desire to connect. We then therefore have to have a desire to see, which is interesting because desire to see is the etymological root of the term philosophy. I mean, we often translate it as a love of wisdom, but the breakdown is desire to see. And so if you don't have a desire to see, you're not going to develop a love of wisdom, which is an inspirational phenomenon to the conscious realization of your interaction with the world or another that you see as a fulfilled character or better skill set or apprentice master. I mean, apprentice master relationship has been around for millennia. I don't know why we got rid of it, but we have to reintroduce it to society because it's crucial. If my father didn't give me what I required, my master will, right? They will teach me how to pay attention to the thing that needs attention. They will teach me how to connect with my inner ability to develop the skill. And so it becomes a trifecta. You are connected with another that is with more experience than you have, more wisdom, more knowledge. And then through their knowledge and through your willingness to work under that platform, you develop a skill to work with the world, with an object from the world. And so so it becomes a very healthy structure to work in. And so in that sense, I will be developing a non-conscious reservoir of experiences that are fully integrated in the world with another person as well. If I am missing anything from my parents, which many of us unfortunately do, but some of us that haven't had that misfortune can see it right away in another that may have had that misfortune. And so that different, and then vice versa. The people that have the misfortune see it in somebody else who had a tight connection with their parents and they've been happily raised. So it's interesting how much of that unspoken apprehension that we've had throughout our time comes out, and often comes out in a problematic way. It creates an issue for us. So from that perspective, from that philosophical view of how integration finds a place in our daily life, why is it important to integrate? I come up to the issue that why do we have this diversification of the process of integration? It should be much more defined. It shouldn't be as broad.
I think a lot of that has to do with motivation. I mean, some people I've heard some doubts about. I try to simplify things. My favorite motto is making, supposedly came from Einstein, make things as simple as possible but not simpler. And I'm happy to communicate with people who are coaches or represent other ways of helping people. I have the privilege of working with people who come to me because they're really suffering. People don't get psychotherapy just for fun. Right. I can tell you that, and it's expensive anyway. They do it because there's a really powerful reason, and so I can use that motivation to then demonstrate and pass on in what it is to connect, what it is to have a relationship. Without that special drive, then it really depends more on, how much does a person have the wisdom to realize what they don't know, and to want to seek more knowledge. Can I show the cover of my book?
Please do, yeah.
Okay. This is my new book. This is the cover that's going to come out. It's not, and it'll be available somewhere in the late fall in the early fall or late summer. And it's designed as a companion for therapists, but it's also meant for anybody who's interested in helping people change for the better. And it starts out with what are the attitudes of curiosity, and how do you develop empathy? How do you understand what's going on deep inside somebody? There are people who've criticized that it's making it too simple and taking some of the mystery out of it. But I think the more people understand, and I've seen our culture come a long ways in understanding things about human beings that used to be quite mysterious. So I think this is the kind of knowledge that drives me and that helps me to connect. I think making that available to as many people as possible is a good thing, and I laud what you're doing, in the same direction. But the hard part is that unless people are suffering, then not everybody has that kind of curiosity and desire to deepen their life. And so, we have to do the best we can to represent that and hope that people are drawn to it.
Right. I mean, the way I see it, you don't have to let things go out of control so much that you have to suffer. I mean, struggling is fine, right? We all struggle. Mm-hmm. And I would rather go to a psychotherapist when I'm struggling, not when I'm at the position where I'm already suffering. And I think this important distinction to be understood, that struggle is fine. I mean, we sweat. There's a reason why we sweat, right? Struggle is good. Sweating is good. There's always time to take a shower and sit down and relax. But if you want to improve your struggles, then a psychotherapist is a good place to visit to figure out how to get more effective if you haven't been able to figure out by yourself. Because
Exactly. Yeah.
when you're suffering, it's like you're already at the surgeon's table, and it's very tricky. It's very, very difficult. It's like almost impossible to recover. I mean, it's improbable, but it is possible. And so the interesting thing to me is that we have so much willpower that we don't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can open the road and open the horizon to that reservoir of power that we haven't dipped into, then we become unstoppable. Then nothing will stop you. Right.
That's so true. I just want to say my father was a philosophy professor at Stanford, and
Great.
and so I decided somewhere in my freshman year in college I didn't want to be an academic. I wanted to be part of what in the 60s we called the real world, and
Same
so
here.
that's why I went into medicine instead. But I wind up thinking about things in ways that are similar to you, and it's true. And one of the things that's I do a lot of, and it's really important, and it's important for people no matter what, is to learn to listen to your own inside, to that motivation that's fundamental and deep, and is not always aligned with what people are doing on the surface in their lives. And so I think connecting with one's true values and true motivation is very helpful. And when the values, like for that person who had low self-esteem, when the values are not healthy ones as a result of trauma, for example, then changing those is not easy. It requires being very clear that you're carrying some values that aren't healthy and they need to be reworked. So that whole idea, that whole realm of listening to one's inside motivation is really important. And that's where I think by setting an example, whenever we're sitting with somebody and truly interested in them, we are setting an example and we're calling out those natural desires and needs to make connections. And those are critical to healing and growth.
Yeah. And, I'm wondering if you think that you would ever succeed at your effort to integrate psychotherapy, to offer psychotherapy as an integrative, unified front.
Well, that's a good story. I started a blog in about 2010, and early on I wrote a post about attachment to your therapist, because somebody wrote me about that, and so I talked about that being the inner mind seeking to get what it hadn't gotten when it was time, and that became pretty soon the go-to place for people who had those feelings. And I kept hearing stories about somebody finally admitted to their therapist that they really felt a need for this person, and if you disappeared, I don't know what I'd do. And in 5 minutes, the security guard was there and marched them out of the clinic and said, never come back. Terrible, terrible things were happening. Yeah. And so around 2015 or so, I decided to change the direction of my writing and my work, and that I would really make it my business to try to spread the word that we don't need to have all of these silos of psychotherapy that currently exist. It's been a tough go. I've had a lot of resistance, but I've managed to get one important paper published in an academic journal, and I'm beginning to be respected. As you know, I've had several leadership roles, and so I'm I'm having fun in my later career, seeing just how far I can go to spread the word that we don't have to be divided anymore. It's not necessary, and we can actually do a better job when we're not divided that way. So that's what my book is about, and that's why, I'm here hoping to have more people get interested in the fact that the science has advanced since 1890, and that we now understand a lot of things that just were not clear back then.
That's right. And I really love this. I love that you're attempting to do this. Although there is a tension between the approach to it, between my understanding and your understanding. But I really love the direction. I really love the effort, and I'm cheering you on, and I'm a fan, and I hope you succeed. It's a tremendous challenge. I'm not surprised that you have a lot of resistance. I'm actually surprised that you have been able to get to the levels of execution that you achieved, and as you say, just mention it in passing, but I should let the people that don't know you, whoever is listening to my podcast that may not know you, but you are the past president of SEPI, Society for Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration, and you are the you are leader of the psychotherapy caucus of the American Psychiatric Association.
Correct, yes.
So you are not like just any psychotherapist or any psychiatrist. You are deeply involved in the mainstream organization of this field. And you are the one who says, guys, we got to do something else.
That's right. That's exactly right. And, I took those leadership positions, or I ran for them and got them on purpose because it all started out with reading a book called "Are You Ready to Be a Thought Leader?" and it had 5 steps, and so I'm following that book because it's not rocket science. It's just something that takes a lot of resilience and a lot of work and just plugging away. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your support. I would like to say, just so people are aware, my Substack is probably the main place where people can meet me and my work, and that is at How Therapy Works, all one word, howtherapyworks.substack.com. And but yes, I'm plugging away, and I seem to have a lot of energy to do that. And I'm saying, who am I to do this? I don't know. I'm just,
Well, you're Jeffrey Smith. You're the man
right.
to do it.
So I'm gonna get as far as I can and enjoy the process.
Well, I love it. Thank you so much. And I'll be watching your progress closely. And I know that you pressed for time tonight, but I hope that we can revisit and discuss many other issues whenever you have the time to discuss those issues. But this was really great pleasure, and thank you so much for coming on to the One in the Many and sharing your efforts and story. And I'm looking forward to next one.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think it's really quite remarkable that we're both kind of focused on this issue of integration, but from very different directions, and we kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to many more discussions and conversations and exploring the process of the integration from both psychotherapy and philosophy, and how that process of integration can influence psychotherapy and ultimately help people understand the value of integration in their own lives so they can get better, get more fulfilled.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really had a good time.
Thank you. This is the One in the Many, The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.